Good evening, grade 8. Tonight's lesson is going to be an extension of yesterday's lesson. In yesterday's lesson, we learned how to multiply a whole number by a fraction using models. And after today's lesson, hopefully you will understand how to model a fraction by a fraction using models. So let's get started here. I'm just going to put a question down like this. So in today's lesson, you'll see something like this. 1/2 times 1/4. You might not know how to figure that out right now, or maybe you do, and that's great, but we're going to actually use models and show you this is a pretty easy question to model out. So the first thing I want you to be aware of is when we're when we're multiplying fractions like this, the one thing we can do is substitute in the word of instead of our multiplication sign. So what I want you to think of is, what's half of 1/4? So I'll give you a real life example from my life. I make this world famous Kit Kat cheesecake, correct? Everyone knows that by now. So here is one of my cheesecakes. Now I like to cut my cheesecake into quarters. So I took this cheesecake that I cut into quarters. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 equal parts. So I took this cheesecake over to friends the other night, and we ate 3/4 of it. So the only thing, so this was, let me just get a different color here. So the blue represents everything that's gone. So this was eaten, this was eaten, and this was eaten. Okay. So the only thing left was this one piece. Well, while I was at work during the day teaching you guys, my wife decided she wanted to eat part of the cheesecake, but being the thoughtful person she is, she didn't want to eat the whole piece. She wanted to leave some for me when I got home from work because she knows how much I love my Kit Kat cheesecake. So what she did is she only ate half of the remaining piece and she left half for me. So for example, she ate half of 1/4. Well, if I was to draw that out, I will take my red here, and like my wife, she cut that piece in half. Now, let's just finish that and pretend we cut all these other pieces equal parts. So now, my wife ate that piece, which left me with this one piece. So how much did I have to eat? What fraction of the entire piece of pie was left for me when I got home from work? Well, I was able to eat one piece, so that's going to be my numerator. Now, how many pieces was the pie cut into now? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that is your new denominator. So 1/2 of 1/4 is actually equal to 1/8. Hopefully that makes sense to you, that this part right here is 1/8, 1/8, 1/8, 1/8, 1/8, 1/8, 1/8, 1/8. If we added it all up, it would be 8/8 or 1 whole. All right, grade 8s. So now I'm going to give you another real life example that happens in my house. This fruit to go here is it's my son's favorite snack. So let's take a look at it here, because I got an example for you. So I'll just open up this fruit to go. They're very delicious, semi-healthy. You get a bunch of them from Costco. All right, so here's a fruit to go. Now, here's the problem I have with it. Typically, my son only eats half, though. He likes them, but he only likes half of it. And then what happens is my daughter comes along and she eats half of what my son had left over. And that means I have to finish the leftovers. Are you noticing a pattern here where I get stuck with the leftovers, whatever everybody else chooses to eat? But so here's my question. My son eats half, my daughter eats half of what's left. What am I left with? So what I'm actually asking you is, if my son what's half of a half? Now remember, we can replace the of, if you look over here, with the multiplication sign. So we're saying, what's a half times a half? Well, let's solve that. I'm going to actually take a knife here, and we're going to cut this in half. So this is how much my son eats. Normally he eats half of it, leaves this. And my daughter, she's only half his age, so she only eats usually half. So she goes right here, which typically leaves me with this piece. That's how much I get to snack on. So the question is, how big is this of the original piece? Well, if you look at it, if I were to put it back together, this is one piece that could cover each one 4 times. So actually, what I'm left with is 1 out of 4. So you see how a half of a half is equal to a fourth. They're very delicious. I highly recommend fruit to goes if you have a chance to eat one. Hopefully you're starting to see a pattern emerge between the pie example, the fruit to go example there, and we'll do another real life example with you in a second here. Alrighty, grade 8s, let's do another example. Now this time I'm going to show you how to multiply a fraction by a fraction using grid graph paper like this. So here's an example for you. I want you to think about this. The other day I started cutting my lawn and I got distracted, and I was 2/3 of the way through cutting my lawn when the Rider game started, so I wanted to go watch the Rider game. So I still had 1/3 of my lawn left to cut. And then after the Rider game, a disappointing loss again. After that Rider game, I went out and I was only able to cut half of the remaining part because my son got hungry and had to run in and get him a fruit to go. So my question is, how much of the lawn did I still have left to cut after I cut 2/3 and then a half of the remaining third? So let's take a look at that question. I'm going to draw my lawn right here. My lawn is a nice little rectangular lot. So I'm just going to draw right here. Now, if you remember, I said I was able to cut 2/3 before I was distracted, right? So let's look. If this is my lawn right now, let's just cut it into thirds right here, just a little dotted line. Okay, so I was able to cut all this right here, and I have 1/3 remaining there. Then after the Rider game, I went back out, and I was able to cut half of that. What I haven't figured out yet is I still had this remaining part down here left to cut. What fraction is that of my entire lawn? So let's go write this out. Basically what I'm asking is, what is half of 1/3? Or instead of half, I can have my multiplication sign there. Well, tell you what, here's a little trick. Let's keep dividing this up because we want to take our rectangular lawn here and we divide it into equal sections. Okay, so how much is still left uncut? This little blue square. So there's 1 blue square. And how many parts is this? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's actually, I still have 1/6 of my lawn left to cut. Noticing any patterns yet? Take a look, think about it. Hopefully that works. Now you might be actually saying, well, Mr. Norman, yeah, look how luckily you drew your rectangle and it worked out perfect for this example. How did you know what happens if you drew it bigger? Well, there's a little trick I will let you in on so that you draw the perfect rectangular diagram each time. What I do is I look at the denominators. In this case, the denominator was 2 and 3, and that's the width and length of the rectangle you must draw. So notice here, the height or the length is 2 and width is 3, and I knew that this would work out once I cut them all like I needed to. So that's a little trick to think of when I give you an example here right away. All right, grade 8, so I'm going to give you a question here, then I'm going to ask you to pause it, see if you can draw it out on your own grid paper that you have at home, and give it a shot here. So, the question I'm going to ask you to answer right now is what is 2/3 of 3/4 equal to, or you can replace the of with the multiplication sign, right? So I'm going to ask you to pause it and try and solve it, and then I will solve it here with you and work your way through the question. So go ahead, try and solve it at home. All right, welcome back. Well, let's take a look at this. I'm going to draw out a rectangle here to try and solve this. Now, how big is my rectangle? Well, if I look back to my previous example where I had 1/2 of a third and I used my lawn as an example, remember I said the length and width of the rectangle you draw must be what the denominators are. So in this case, I need my one dimension to be 3, length 3, and the width 4. So let's do this. I'll go 1, 2, 3, and that means I got to go 4 across. 1, 2, 4. Now I just complete the rectangle like that. Beautiful. So what we're looking for is 2/3 of 3/4. So the first thing is we have to divide this rectangle into quarters. Now I'm looking at it, and the easiest way right now, if you see, we have 4 as our dimension here on the bottom. What I can do is just cut these into 4. So you see I have 1, 2, 3, 4 equal parts. So I've cut it into 4s. Now I need 3/4 of that. So now I'm going to deal with just these 3 parts right here, these 3 rows right here. Now I want, out of these 3 rows, I want 2/3 of that, right? So hey, look what I'm left with out of these 3 here. So now I'm dealing with do you see here? I'm dealing with 1, 2. Now I have 3 parts. I only want 2 out of those 3 parts. So I'm going to take this row and just this row. Okay, so I'm going to take this. Now my little trick, if you look over here back to the lawn thing, was now I got to try and divide this rectangle into equal parts. So let's just cut the rectangle like this. Okay. Now how many of these little squares did I cut my rectangle into? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I know I have 12 equal parts. That's going to be the bottom number on my answer. And how many do I have colored in? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 6/12 as my answer. Or if you look at it, we know equivalent fractions. 6/12 is actually equal to 1/2. And look, is that exactly half of that? It is. So there is how you would figure out 2/3 of 3/4.